Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok.
No witty shout-outs to give this time.
That's okay. I mean, I know they'll come to you as we make our way through
You're so right.
this film, this discussion of this film. Is it even right to call this a film, or is this more of a movie? Because I know
Save
they're
it.
not always the same thing.
Save it. That's a quality that's a quality point.
All right, then. Well, everyone, this is Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Paras.
We have a return guest, Ryan Moran. Welcome back to the podcast.
Welcome back, Ryan.
Thank you. Happy to be back, as always. Excited
Is this
to
number
dive
3
in.
for you?
This is numero tres.
Yeah, the trilogy.
Excellent.
Yes. All good things end in a trilogy, but maybe not my appearances.
I hope not. I hope you can make this into a saga.
It'll spring on another 3 episodes, and then from there another 3. How about that?
Do you think I could be like the Fast and Furious version of podcasting with you?
Only if with each appearance you just get it's just more and more fun.
We just continually talk about family more.
That works too.
There is some family stuff in this movie.
That's true.
I guess. Not as much as the other Hulk film that we covered. There was far more family matters in Hulk.
Yeah. The Hulk Family Matters with Les Urkel.
Yeah, and 4-Leaf Tayback. Yeah, at least this movie didn't have Nick Nolte in it. I think we can all be grateful for that. Except for our guest, Garrett, who was quite a fan of his acting.
Ugh.
There was a clear sincerity to Nick Nolte's performance, if one would even say he was performing at all.
Let's just go with it. That's the style.
What did Garrett say? He looks like he's made of vodka.
Yes.
That's fair. That's
very fair. Yeah, Ryan, 3 appearances on the podcast. That's really the threshold of like where you become a serious guest. So
I don't feel any more serious.
I think you will by the time we're done talking about the Incredible Hulk.
Seriously, a need for a drink? Maybe.
Do you have one?
I do, actually, yes.
That's good. That's the proper way to record.
Yes.
Anton usually doesn't like to partake. He's, time zone wise, it's a little early in the day for him, but
there have definitely been a couple occasions, but
is this
soon.
one of them?
No, not today, but soon enough, I'm sure.
Did you drink while you were watching this movie?
I did have a drink while I was watching this movie.
Well, that's the proper way. Probably the only way to watch this movie.
Something mixed with Mountain Dew, right? That's kind of all you can really do here.
Well, you could drink. What's that? The Incredible Hulk made of? Hypnotic and Hennessy.
Hypnotic and Hennessy. Yeah.
Truly awful. I don't recommend. Does anyone over 22 years old drink those?
No, I think life lessons have taught them at that point. You would assume that hangovers are not worth it with that.
That seems like a drink from the late 2000s. I feel like it must have fallen out of favor.
I haven't heard it mentioned probably since college, I would guess.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Adult money starts coming into your pockets at some point, and then you realize there's just better ways to spend.
Yeah, it's not only that, but you also realize flavored liquor is for kids. Like adults don't really drink flavored liquor. There's exceptions to that, but like by and large, if you're out of college, you're not buying flavored vodka, flavored rum. You're just buying the regular stuff.
I agree with the caveat that it is fun. I've been seeing more and more lately people posting recipes of drinks that bring you back to like nostalgic drinks from your childhood or even like replicating drinks to get things like Dr. Pepper flavored alcohol. It's kind of cool. That's the only time I would probably dive back into flavored alcohol at all.
But do you regularly keep that around the house?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
No. Well, Ryan, anything to plug or promote before we get into this discussion?
Plug free's the way to be.
Well, we'll plug for you with the advert,
Yes. They
which
seem
is
like
just baked into the template now. It's quite
fine
user
gentlemen,
friendly.
they sound like.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I'm not a user of the TikTok, but I've heard it's thrilling.
Yeah, give it time. It'll be forced on you.
Yeah, it's popular in some
Well,
circles, I've heard.
we keep talking about how we're gonna make one to promote the podcast, but we still haven't gotten around to that.
All in
Ti-
good
yeah,
time.
all
Yeah.
in good time.
Baby steps.
Next
One rock at a
season.
time. How do you move a mountain? One rock at a time.
Practice.
One Dwayne Johnson at a time.
Sure.
Where's that Carnegie Hall?
I don't know. Either one. I think the analogy works.
Yeah, let's go with it.
Yeah, let's just assume that it does. Well, I guess we can get right into the discussion then, since there's no plugging or no admin. We do the same admin every week, Anton. The listeners know. They know.
Right. But it's also fun sometimes to just kind of throw in what is the current events, which actually becomes past events for whatever the listeners are tuning into.
We are so far ahead of recording at this point that I don't even know if that's prudent.
Well, we could even call it now. I mean, are we celebrating the New York Knicks in the number 1 seed in the East?
They are?
I mean, we can predict the future and then see how wrong we are when this episode airs.
Oh, I mean, you never know. You can dream.
I hope everyone has an incredible Halloween.
I don't know if we're quite that far.
So
But
what are you guys doing for Thanksgiving 2025? I guess this is going to be airing about a week before Easter. So if you are a follower of Christ, happy Easter. And of course, if you're Jewish, happy Holy Week. It's Passover. We will be releasing a surprise Easter-oriented episode the same week that you will be hearing this episode. I won't say what it is, but it is
Ooh.
going to be a very big, very controversial film.
The wheels are spinning here.
Yeah.
Nothing-
I already
nothing
told
to
you
do-
what it was offline, right?
yeah, nothing to do with eggs or Easter bunnies.
No.
The wheels just stopped.
Let's get the wheels rolling for this week's film. This is The Incredible Hulk. This is, of course, the second part of what is a double feature. The last episode that you would have heard in release order was 2003's Hulk, directed by Ang Lee, which was a steaming pile of crap. But it was a lot of fun to talk about with our guest, Garrett. And we decided to just knock both Hulk movies out at the same time. I don't know if that was a mistake or a smart move on our part, but hey, this is what we decided to do, so this is what we're doing.
Yeah, it was a painful one. I'll tell you that, Pat. Having to a lot of Hulk in at one time.
Yeah, I won't bury the lead here. They can't figure this character out when it comes to a feature length film. He seems to just function better as a supporting character. But we'll get into it. We'll get into it. All right. Without further ado, scientist Bruce Banner desperately seeks a cure for the gamma radiation that contaminated his cells and turned him into the Hulk. Cut off from his true love, Betty Ross, and forced to hide from his nemesis, General Thunderbolt Ross, Banner soon comes face to face with a new threat, a supremely powerful enemy known as the Abomination. The Incredible Hulk was the second film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was released on June 13th, 2008 by Marvel Studios, Valhalla Motion Pictures, and Universal Pictures. Directed by Louis Leterrier. Screenplay by Zach Penn and Edward Norton, with an asterisk on Edward Norton's name. Starring Edward Norton, Liv Tyler, William Hurt, Tim Roth, Tim Blake Nelson, Ty Burrell, and Christina Cabot. The budget was $150 million. Adjusted for inflation in today's money, that is $213 million. And the box office return was a measly $265 million. That is $377 million adjusted for inflation. Ryan, as this week's guest, why did you want to talk about The Incredible Hulk?
I'm a big Marvel fan in general. The MCU has really been one of my favorite, if not my favorite, collaborative movie series. I know that's probably a controversial statement, but I'm going to stick with it. But man, oh man, if you had to cherry pick something that's kind of part of the MCU, but kind of not, depends on how you view it. This was just, in my opinion, the biggest fail, or one of the earliest biggest fails, I guess. Now they're starting to put out just some interesting stuff, but I still to your point, love the Hulk. Not Edward Norton's Hulk per se, but as a support character, I think yeah, great. But as a standalone, it leaves a lot to be desired. So I thought this would be a fun one to talk about.
Indeed. Now, Anton, you're a massive comic fan as well.
It's fair to say.
Yeah. What are your initial thoughts on this film?
If there was a way to give this film enough gamma radiation to just destroy it, we should do that.
Okay. Tell us how you really feel. Well, I mean, we've been covering the MCU films in release order, right? We started with Iron Man 2, and then we moved on to the first Thor film, and then, fairly recently, we did Captain America, the First Avenger. Now, you might be wondering, if we were doing them in release order, how did we skip this one? Well, we skipped this one because we actually forgot about it. That's how insignificant this is. And Ryan, you hit the nail on the head. It's technically part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it doesn't quite fit in there very well, does it?
No, they just locked it up in a little cupboard and said, "Let's not talk about that anymore."
You have to wonder how much of a bullet Marvel dodged. Imagine if this had been the first MCU film. It was, of course, the second.
Yeah, they would have been in trouble, I think.
Yeah. They struck gold with the first Iron Man. That was released a month before this in 2008. That was a massive hit. A little bit unexpected because Robert Downey Jr. was seen as a risk for the series at the time, and it was a gamble that obviously paid off, and it made a lot of money. But unlike Iron Man, this film, The Incredible Hulk, it was a flop. It failed to turn a profit back for the studio, and ever since then, they've really done everything in their power to distance themselves from it. It's the Marvel movie that Marvel doesn't want very much to do with. And it is a shame because there was a great deal of hype for this. I would say most people did not like the Ang Lee Hulk, which came out in 2003. Again, that's the last film we covered in the last episode. We didn't like it either. I gave it an F. Anton, you were a little kinder to it, but you didn't.
Little bit.
Little bit, but you didn't like it.
No.
You gave it a D. Our guest was really kind to it and gave it a C. But I respect Garrett's opinion. He defended it with valor, I thought.
Ooh, that's an F through and through.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm not exaggerating when I texted you this last week. It's one of the worst films I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you there.
It was just never again. But now, of course, that was not technically an MCU film. That was released sort of by Marvel, but it's really more of a Universal property. But I remember being pretty excited for this one because Edward Norton as the Hulk, that seemed like a good idea. Edward Norton, you look at his filmography, his body of work, he is one of the most respected actors of his generation. Were both of you excited for this?
I was. I mean, especially mentioning Edward Norton, I think is a key part of that. I was really big. I've always been a pretty big fan of Edward Norton, so in my youth, I thought, hey, Edward Norton, that's bringing a pretty big name to Marvel. This is great. How could this backfire?
I would say I was somewhat excited, maybe not. The Hulk was never my favorite Marvel character. I've always gravitated towards Iron Man, so my entire being was focused on that movie. And then after seeing it, the hype for this Hulk was just through the roof, I would say. And Edward Norton, I think, is an awesome actor overall. But I don't know. I maybe young me didn't really question it as much as older me would now. But I didn't really see how he could be the Hulk.
I was excited solely just because of Edward Norton. Ryan, like you, I had no emotional attachment to the Hulk. I had not even seen the Ang Lee movie by the time this one came out in 2008. I didn't actually see that all the way through until recently when I unfortunately had to watch it for the podcast. So I wasn't, my expectations were not tainted by that film. I had heard it was bad. So I really had pleasant expectations for this just based on solely the fact that I liked Edward Norton, which I thought was enough reason for me. I think I saw it around the time that it came out, but I didn't remember anything about it. So if I did see this in 2008, and I'm 99% sure that I did, it had no impact on me.
Well, I think I know what happened, Pat. I think that your rage consumed you and you turned into a Hulk-like being destroying the film theater after you watch 2008's The Incredible Hulk, and it's been sitting inside you for years.
You woke up in Costa Rica.
Ecuador,
Well,
Mexico, Brazil.
You're different.
It's all the same thing. We're kidding, of course. Those countries are not all the same thing. But we're going to get to that because I don't have it on camera. But I actually, for whatever reason, I have the novelization for this film. I don't know how I acquired it, but I did. And I read it in preparation for this episode. And it was largely unhelpful. With that being said, let's get into the production history of this. So as we mentioned last week, we covered Ang Lee's Hulk. That was released in the summer of 2003 by Universal. It was a critical and commercial failure. One of the screenwriters on that film, James Schamus, he had an idea for a sequel plan that would have involved Grey Hulk, and it would have featured Abomination as one of the villains. Now, Universal was originally targeting a 2005 release date for the sequel. However, because that movie did so poorly at the box office, that changed everything. Now, due to the complex legal rights around the character of the Hulk, Universal did not meet their contractual deadline for delivering on a sequel, which freed things up for Marvel Studios to get involved. In early 2006, producer Avi Arad confirmed that Marvel would be providing the funding for the sequel's budget. Universal was going to handle distribution. Marvel decided that deviating from Ang Lee's style would be best for, quote, really starting the Marvel Hulk franchise, end quote. Now, Louis Leterrier, who was a fan of the Hulk TV series, he initially sought the director's job for the first Iron Man, which ultimately ended up going to Jon Favreau, thank goodness. Kevin Feige and the other Marvel executives liked Leterrier enough that they offered him this film. And it's worth pointing out, of course, this film and the first Iron Man were developed simultaneously. They came out within about a month of each other. Leterrier is best known for directing the second Transporter film, the 2010 remake of Clash of the Titans, and most recently Fast X. So really nothing impressive there as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's fair.
You a big Clash of the Titans fan, Ryan?
I'll say I like the action. I think some cool action scenes, but no, overall no.
No, didn't think so. Nobody is. Leterrier's primary inspiration was Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's Hulk Gray, a retelling of the character's first appearance. Anton, any idea what that is? Because I don't.
Yeah, Hulk Gray. It's a fun fact for folks that don't know. In the original first Incredible Hulk issue, the Hulk's original color was not green, but actually gray. But in subsequent comics, it was just due to an ink error, it turned his skin green. They ended up writing into the comic books a different version of the Hulk that kind of calls back to that gray character, that actually more so expresses that version of the Hulk as a more aggressive version. And we definitely I see some elements of that with a very, very aggressive Hulk in this movie.
Sounds less interesting when he's gray.
Yeah, it's he also dons another persona called Joe Fixit, where he's essentially a mob character. So imagine the Hulk, he's gray and he's wearing like mob clothes, like a full-on suit, a full-on tux.
Are you kidding or?
Nope. No, I'm not kidding. His name's Joe Fixit.
The variations of the Hulk in the comic series they're incredible.
Huh. Okay. It sounds like I don't know why anyone would do that, but
it sounds like comic books, my friend.
Meh, see?
Sorry, talk, say meh.
Hulk smash.
Zach Penn, who wrote a draft of the first film in 1996, said the film would follow up to the 2003 film, but he stressed that it would be more tonally similar to the TV show. Now, after the studio rejected a treatment by another screenwriter in 2006, Zach Penn wrote 3 drafts before departing in early 2007 to work on another project. Leterrier wanted to cast none other than Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner, but the studio insisted on Edward Norton, who negotiated a contract with Marvel that not only included the starring role, but also as a screenwriter. Edward Norton was a big fan of the comics, and he worked relentlessly on the script, even continuing to polish it well into production. Now, even in pre-production, Leterrier acknowledged that the screenplay had almost nothing in common with Ang Lee's film, other than the character hiding out in Brazil, and that the new film would basically serve as a reboot.
So Norton rewrote scenes every day. He removed the character Rick Jones and toned down S.H.I.E.L.D.'s presence. He also added the scene where Banner attempts to extract a cure from a flower and is emailing with Samuel Stearns, which references Bruce Jones's story. So sad. Rick Jones really did not get love in the MCU. Ultimately, the Writers Guild gave sole screenwriting credit to Zach Penn, which greatly angered Norton. And Zach Penn later stated, quote, "I wasn't happy with Norton coming to Comic-Con saying that he wrote the script," end quote. Filming lasted from July to November 2007, primarily taking place in Toronto. The action sequences at the college were filmed at the University of Toronto. An abandoned factory in Hamilton, Ontario served as the Brazilian bottling plant where Banner was working. There was also a week-long shoot in New York City and 2 weeks in Rio de Janeiro. There is more than an hour of footage that was not included in the final cut. Most of the deleted scenes involve flashbacks that test audiences found too similar to the 2003 film. Snippets of these can be seen briefly in the beginning as a montage of sorts. And this replaced the original opening, where Banner comes to the Arctic to commit suicide. When the scene ends, in an instant, the frozen body of Captain America is partially seen in the ice. This is featured in the novelization. Now, Norton and Leterrier feuded with Marvel over the final running time. They wanted it to be 135 minutes, while the producers wanted it to be under 2 hours. It was Marvel who chose to make these disputes public. Whatever happened, we know that Marvel overruled the director and Norton, choosing to make edits to the film themselves. The final runtime ended up being 112 minutes. While Norton did attend the film's premiere, he avoided doing interviews about it and busied himself with charity work during the theatrical run. In the years since the film's release, the rumor is that Marvel promised Norton final cut of the film and then backpedaled, making their own edits, greatly upsetting Norton with the finished result. The Incredible Hulk ended up with a respectable 67% Rotten Tomatoes score, but underperformed at the box office, failing to turn a profit during its theatrical run. It ended up as the lowest grossing MCU film in the series, at least until the COVID releases. So, just some light drama to go through that production history.
Love a little light drama.
It's about to get more dramatic because it's time to talk about why wasn't it better. Number one, let's start with the elephant in the room, Edward Norton. He was miscast. I think he was the wrong choice for this kind of role, and I think most people would agree with me.
Now, it's interesting because, right, when we think of when the film was released, only a month before was Iron Man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And bit of a gamble from the studio to give Robert Downey Jr. basically like his second chance in Hollywood to succeed. Gamble paid off really well. Norton didn't have that kind of notoriety, and actually probably it was a scene at the time is really advantageous to attach a huge name to the film.
It definitely was. The difference between the two actors, Downey and Norton, and, you know, again, wonderful actor though Edward Norton is, he's not particularly charming. He's not particularly funny enough to carry this kind of role. I think if you're judging this based on like just an acting performance, he checks all the boxes, right? Like, I don't think he's ever given a bad acting performance. I've never seen him in a movie and I'm like, wow, his acting sucks. Like, I can't believe he phoned this in. He doesn't really phone anything in. But the point is, was it the right performance for this kind of role? I don't think so. I find him very flat. Anton, you've pointed this out, I think on the last episode. He has a good physique for the role.
Yes, he does.
But he's playing this role to me like a lot of scenes that he would in like a Wes Anderson film. Just like with Eric Bana in the 2003 film, I just simply don't believe that he's a scientist. Mark Ruffalo was the only one of the three actors who I actually bought as a scientist.
100%. 100%. I think that's true for almost every character in this film. It just didn't buy it.
No, you could even go, we'll get to the rest of the cast a little bit later, but you could even go like one step farther. William Hurt, great actor. Was he believable as an army general? No, not compared to Sam Elliott, as one of the few things that the 2003 film did better. Sam Elliott was a much more believable general.
General Thunderhoof?
Yeah, Thunder Thighs.
Yes.
Now, that being said, the studio should have known what they were getting into when they cast Norton, right? He did have a reputation in another way, which we'll get to shortly. Here's the bottom line, right? And this is because, you know, there's always people that will defend Edward Norton in this role, right? I think generally speaking, most people would agree that he is miscast, but he does have his defenders. And what I would say to them is this. Can you really picture him in the Avengers sharing the screen with Downey, Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Evans? Like, can you picture him flirting with Scarlett Johansson? Absolutely not for me. No way.
No
Nope.
way. We touched on Mark Ruffalo already, and there's just a bit of a, how do I put this? There's a vulnerability to the way that Mark Ruffalo plays the character that you can see he's a bit tortured in the fact that the other side of him is the Hulk. But I feel like Edward Norton just came off a little flat in this portrayal, and definitely not my favorite.
Yeah.
The big piece to this, which we just hinted at, there is the off-screen piece, right? This is far more interesting to discuss than just his performance. Norton is very well respected in the industry, but he does have a reputation for being a bit of a diva, a bit of a control freak. He is known for wanting to rewrite scripts himself, and I guess the term would be you could be described as high maintenance on set, right?
Well, we've talked about this before. Just the man cares a lot about
He does.
his films.
Glad you brought that up, Anton. It's important to note that with most movies, this is not a problem, right? You want an actor who's invested in the role. Most filmmakers would love to have an actor like him who is actually invested in contributing to the script, bringing his own ideas for the character. He's invested. But if you're Marvel and you're trying to get the MCU off the ground and you're in it for the long haul, you don't really want an actor who's not going to play ball, right? And Norton, not going to play ball. He has this reputation, right? Because he doesn't settle for bad writing. He wants to make the best film possible. He genuinely cares. And that is precisely what made him the wrong choice for this. He was never going to play ball. And Marvel should have known that before they hired him.
We talked about other films where there's been difficulty with actors on set that maybe didn't play ball as nicely as they should have. But at least Norton cares. Like, I feel like there's examples where sometimes actors let petty things get in the way of even just driving a film forward, a la Blade or Wesley Snipes refusing to open his eyes during like the hospital scene in Blade Trinity. And like just being a complete baby about it to the point where instead of convincing, instead of the director convincing him to open his eyes for the scene, they just CGI eyes on top of his closed eyes. Like, that's just someone being a baby. But Norton, I feel like there is just a lot to say that Norton's reputation is that he sees acting as his craft and art, and he won't compromise that.
Right. You're talking about unprofessionalism, which is not what this is.
Right.
Do you feel like Edward Norton is the right type of actor to your point, when you talk about the MCU as a whole and how he would eventually end up on screen with all these big name movie stars, but the Hulk itself is just a supplementary character? Do you think that's his type of role?
No. And it's hard to say, right? Because we're not sure how much they actually had planned out, right? We know that they wanted to end phase 1 with the Avengers, but I think this film is proof that they weren't quite sure how they were going to get there.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely evidence of evolution in the kind of overall design and pathway, depending on how these movies went. But I don't know. I guess it's easy to say in hindsight, but I just don't think the Hulk as a character makes in any world sense to be a primary focal point of a movie.
I mean,
I don't either.
I'll disagree. I'm the one in the room that disagrees. And I actually see Edward Norton taking it on as a bit of accepting the challenge in the same way Ang Lee tried to accept the challenge in his own way. But I think Powers that Be ended up taking control because they really wanted to course correct and avoid creating another emotionally driven film like Ang Lee's Hulk ended up becoming. So a lot ended up on the cutting room floor.
You know what I'm going to say, Anton, to counter that when we get to it in the other reason. I agree with Ryan here. I never felt that the Hulk was worthy of a film the way they wanted to do it. It was just too much of a challenge.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what Norton had in mind for this film, if he really did end up getting the control he was looking for, what he could have done with it. But there's just so much in the film that's just awful. And you have to think, based on how he is as an actor, as a professional, he had hands on pieces. So why was so much of the film so bad? And do you think he decided to do the breathing techniques like a character in a video game that ran out of stamina and you got to stand still for 5 seconds?
Yeah,
gain that stamina bar.
Yeah, I didn't know that breathing and heart rate were the same thing as anger, but apparently they are.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, I've learned this from this film. You know, it's interesting about the control thing, right? Because I don't know what to believe about Marvel allegedly promising to give Norton final cut privileges on the film and then quote unquote betraying him, right? Final cut is the type of agreement that is included in a contract. It is not a verbal promise. So like Norton either had it or he didn't. If he thought he had it and it wasn't in his contract, then that's very naive on his part. I don't know what his expectations were. He hasn't had a lot to say about this over the years. Now, the director, Leterrier, he had major disagreements with Marvel as well regarding the film's tone and the runtime that the Anton that you mentioned in the production history. He spoke about this film later on, and he said the scene at the university is the turning point where he lost control of the film. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he meant by that. Norton ended up siding with Leterrier. They both feuded with the studio, right? You had Marvel and Universal who were pretty much in unison about the film needs to be this long. It needs to have this particular tone. But things got so heated that Norton flat out refused to promote the film, like we talked about. You know, he went to do charity work in Africa.
Yeah, he didn't
after
refuse.
The premiere.
He was providing services.
Right.
It just happened to be at the same time. A little conflict of scheduling.
Well, here's the interesting part, right? He was fired.
Yep.
Because he signed on to this movie with the expectation that like there was going to be the Avengers, there may have been another Hulk movie. They fired him. They went with Mark Ruffalo. And it's funny because that's who Leterrier initially wanted in the role to begin with. It sounds like Norton had beef with everybody, right? Because he was also upset with the Writers Guild decision not to give him credit for his screenplay work. Anton, Marvel has that early history, right? Especially with, individuals like Perlmutter and, the quote unquote creative committee. They were meddling a bit too much in the early days of the MCU. Like, I think we should keep in mind that Jon Favreau and Joss Whedon both walked away from the franchise, leaving a lot of money on the table.
And I mean, there were a lot of shakeups on the Marvel. Well, Disney dealt with that, right? A lot of shakeups on the Marvel writing side.
Yeah. So Norton, officially, he received no credit for the screenplay. However, the novelization that I own, on the cover, it says, based on a screenplay by Zach Penn and Edward Norton.
You should sell that on eBay.
I don't think it's worth much money, but I'll look into it. It might be $10 maybe, right?
Ooh, that's $10.
Yeah, a little Alexander Hamilton action.
I think
Norton later stated that he was glad that he walked away from the role. Well, he didn't walk away because he was fired. So, not really sure what he meant by that.
Maybe he said I quit right before they fired him.
It was one of those it was like when
you can't fire me. I quit.
Yeah, it's like when a coach leaves a sports team and they explain it by what do they say, like
mutual
consent.
Yeah.
Now take this with a grain of salt because this is only a rumor, but I have read that Robert Downey Jr. and Norton really dislike one another, and Downey did not want to work with him. So it's probably just another reason for the breakup between Norton and Marvel.
You'd have to imagine those two egos colliding would just never be a good thing for film.
No. And at that point, if you're Marvel, you're looking at the two actors, you're looking at the films. One of them made almost $600 million, the other one lost money. So you're like, kind of a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
It all boils down to this, right? Norton was difficult to work with, and the movie didn't make money. When both of those things happen, someone's getting fired.
Mm-hmm.
And probably heavily influenced the decisions in the later Marvel films to choose relatively unknown actors that probably wouldn't use the weight of their career to try to move films in specific directions.
They were still figuring it out, right? It was only the second film. Number 2 reason why it wasn't better. It's not memorable.
Nope. It is not.
I have a very good memory for films that I see, when I see them, where I see them, who I see them with. And I mentioned this in the intro. I can't even remember when exactly I saw this film because I didn't remember much about it. I guess you could chalk it up to a storytelling problem. But rewatching this last week for the recording, one of the things that struck me about this film is that nothing really happens in it, right? The Hulk, he starts off the movie, he's hiding out in Brazil. The U.S. government finds out where he is, and they pursue him. He gets away, and then he goes on the run. I guess he sneaks into the United States, right?
Right.
The government continues to pursue him, and then he gets away, and then he's on the run again, and the government pursues him, and then he gets away, and that's kind of the end of the movie. There's a little fight in there or two. but that's about it.
Hardly even call them fights.
I mean, would you even call the film, or would you even call the movie is it an origin story? Nah, not really.
No,
No.
certainly not.
But then is it a chapter, like, then it's a self-contained story in the episodes of the Hulk. It's like, but it doesn't even feel like anything happened in the story.
It's irrelevant. It's an irrelevant blip in the story that is the Hulk.
Yeah, like you think about what actually happens during the movie. Like, there's the fight at the bottling plant, right? What happens as a result of that? Nothing.
Nothing.
He has
Because
to leave
he
Brazil.
escapes, right? That Brazilian bottling plant, and then and then he escapes. He gets into the U.S., right? And then he gets into another fight at the college. And what happens as a result of that? Nothing, because he just gets away from that too. And then he gets into another fight in New York where he ends up, sort of saving the day. What happens as a result of that? Nothing, because he just
Nothing.
vanishes again, and Emil Blonsky gets arrested.
So it's a movie about nothing. Is this the Hulk Seinfeld, essentially?
No, it would be well written if it were a Seinfeld.
There we go.
It's a dead end. The story is a dead end. There's no resolution.
There's no purpose.
He doesn't win at anything either, right? All he succeeds in the movie is he beats up the Abomination. He wants to be with Betty Ross. He doesn't end up with her. He wants to cure himself of being the Hulk. He doesn't. The government, they try to pursue him. They fail a bunch of times. I guess you could argue at the end he learns how to control his
That would
power
be
a little bit.
Slightly.
Yeah, that would really be it. Is the way that he learned control to whatever extent you can control the Hulk.
I found it more cohesive than the Ang Lee film. I'll give it that.
For sure.
But at what cost? I feel like the film itself had. I'm still kind of falling back onto this of like Ang Lee's Hulk, of course, was very ambitious to try to tell a compelling story about a character that is flawed and hard to tell a story about. So Ang Lee focused on trying to tell the emotional aspect of and how that drives a more compelling story of the tragedy that is the Incredible Hulk. In this story, you don't really get like an origin story that drives like the emotional weight of being the Hulk. You just get the Hulk being angry and running from the military and then fighting like an evil version of himself. It's very one-dimensional.
I agree with you about Ang Lee's ambition, but I still think that movie sucked.
Horrible.
And I mean, I don't disagree with you. I do think I admire the ambition, but I still think the movie sucked. I don't think I disagree at all.
So we all agree.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think it's just admirable. At least he went in a direction that was at least braver than whatever we got with this film.
He did. He swung for the fences. He just struck out.
Yeah,
you forgot the bat at home.
I mean, it's tough. It's like it really does surprise me when the studios put out exactly what, like, they tried to course correct very hard with this film, right? It's like, okay, that first one, too boring, not enough action, all this emotional stuff, let's rip it out. But then they just didn't write a story to go along with it. And while it's cohesive and easy to follow along, that's because it's like a paint by number story. It's like monster on the run, monster in love, monster fights another monster. Now the monster's less of a monster. It's like,
well, at least they cast a compelling villain with Tim Roth. No, I'm kidding. They didn't. He sucked.
No, they did not.
No.
Oh my God, he's awful.
Awful. I know he is an Academy Award nominee. He's a very good villain in Rob Roy. He's been in some good movies. I'm not a fan of Tim Roth. I've always thought of him as like discount Sean Bean.
See, I like Tim Roth. I have no issue with Tim Roth at all. I just thought his character portrayal was terrible. And maybe portrayal is not even the right word. If that's how it was written, then what are you doing? Like, he just, there were so many issues with that character. So many.
Very very, again, one-dimensional. Like, he just
Half a dimension.
Half a dimension is a fair way to put it. Also, I'd argue this, Pat. I think Tim Roth's a funnier actor than Sean Bean.
Funnier, sure, but was there any comedy on display here at all?
Not at all. But they did try to course correct that in future appearances for Tim Roth's character.
I don't know why they brought him back, because his character sucked and he sucked.
For
Emil
She-Hulk.
Blonsky,
Pat,
he
you
is. I have to say,
hurt.
now that we're going through these MCU films, Anton, or at least most of them, and we're reassessing them in certain ways. I would say thus far, he's the worst villain in the MCU that I can think of offhand. Now,
No.
admittedly, I'm not as familiar with
There's much
No.
worse.
as you are, but hear me out. This is why I think he's the worst villain. What is his motivation other than he wants a good fight?
He's getting old.
Like, that's it?
I'm getting kind of tired when I'm chasing the Hulk down. Do you think you got anything for me?
That's it. He has no connection to Bruce Banner. He never meets Bruce Banner. He only knows him as the Hulk. They never meet each other at like face to face actually as their own characters, right? They obviously fight when they're both monsters, but he has no history with Bruce Banner. There's no motivation. It's like they didn't even try to give him a backstory or motivation at all. Like they didn't even attempt to write the character.
Yeah, he's not at all believable as what he's meant to portray. His character makes no sense. His motivations are beyond questionable. What are you doing? Why do you just walk up to the Hulk to get kicked into pulp? Nothing he did made sense.
No,
and it's again a bit of a course correction from Marvel to create a simpler villain,
which is fine. There's nothing wrong with a simple villain if you just input
could
a
write a
little
good
common
villain.
sense into them.
Yeah.
Like give him a little bit of a better motive. Like he's like a dog, right? That he saw like a bone, and he's just like, yeah, I gotta keep after this thing that I don't know what it is, and you won't tell me, but I want to keep chasing him. So count me in.
I mean, when we think of Phase 1 villains in general, like even Iron Man's villain, right? It's still basically it's a evil version of Iron Man. But that made a bit more sense because Obadiah Stane wants to take over Stark Industries.
He had a history with Tony Stark. Right. It made perfect sense.
It made a lot more sense.
Yeah. Ivan Vanko had a backstory, right? They actually gave him a backstory.
Loki being the villain in Thor. Made sense.
It's a different franchise, Anton, but when we get to it later this season, Star Trek 3, Christopher Lloyd as the villainous Klingon, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has no history with Kirk or the crew of the Enterprise, right? And you could argue he's a very simple villain. But I would say an effective one because they make it very clear what his motivations are and why he's there in conflict with the central characters. They don't do that here at all with Blonsky.
You're right.
Not even a little bit.
Totally.
He's just getting old, and he doesn't like getting old. Can you make me like that thing? It's just stupid.
It was a curious decision to make him British too. They're like, well, he's on loan from the Royal Marines. It's like, why couldn't it just be an American actor? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it served no purpose.
I guess Tim Roth, they either like forgot he was British or they couldn't get a convincing American accent. And they're like, Royal Marines.
It's more mysterious.
Simpleton. Not just simple. And then Liv Tyler as Betty Ross. What a downgrade from Jennifer Connelly, man.
Not a good performance.
No. Again, not a well-written role. Another unconvincing scientist.
You think so though? Come on.
About what? Scientist?
Yeah, you could tell she was a scientist in the film.
You think? Really?
No. She just seemed dumb.
Also, I feel bad for Phil Dunphy. She just ditches him immediately.
What the heck is that?
Why was his character even in the movie?
So funny.
What's the point of having him in the movie?
Just to show that she loves the Hulk so much, she'll leave her current boyfriend without even a word. Hey, do you want to go to that pizza place that me and my ex-boyfriend used to go to all the time?
That's a no-no, always.
Yeah, like, come on, let's find a new pizza spot.
Now, it's really tough because that character, Doc Samson, is actually really important in the comics. Basically, a version. He's like a psychiatrist.
Phil Dunphy?
Yes.
Yeah, please refer to him as Phil Dunphy.
Phil Dunphy. In the comics, the character's name's Doc Samson, and he's like the Hulk if the Hulk was a psychiatrist, and the only version of him affected by the gamma radiation is he has like super strength and his hair is green. Actually, a pretty fun character from the comics that would have been interesting to have a more true to the comic version in the film. But instead, we just got Phil Dunphy.
Yeah. And by the way, for the record, I'm a big Modern Family fan. I'm not holding this against Ty Burrell. I love Phil Dunphy. I love Ty Burrell. I will never hold this bad movie against him.
It was more of a cameo for him than anything.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to see him outside of Modern Family because he's played a lot of smaller roles in other films. Like he was in Dawn of the Dead, the remake.
That's like that. Yep.
He was in Evolution.
A stellar guy. Evolution. That's a great movie.
But then
I love Evolution.
But then he had his bid break with Modern Family.
Thank goodness, because he's one of the all-time great TV characters.
Yes, I agree with that.
Speaking of Betty Ross, like back to her, I had forgotten they just completely erase her character from the rest of the MCU. Just never mentioned again.
Yeah, it's one of those things that she's just better off being
Which
wiped
is
off.
weird considering they make a point to bring back William Hurt as General Thunderbolt Ross. But then it just dawned on me when I was rewatching this. Wait, yeah, him and Banner aren't they both in Age of Ultron, Anton, and Civil
Yes.
War? They don't really have any interaction though?
They don't, but I do remember them. And ugh.
They wink at each other. If you look carefully, you see like a remember that?
So Tim Blake Nelson, he's starting to become the leader at the end of this film. Anton, is that correct?
That's right. You get a bit of a hint of that this is the person that eventually becomes the leader. Who non-fans of the comic book, just a bit quick FYI, the leader is one of the Hulk's most formidable foes. I think you might sense a theme, another character in that universe that's been impacted by gamma radiation.
And they are bringing him back, is that correct?
That's correct. It's been reported that Tim Blake Nelson will be back as the leader in the next, it's not a Hulk film, but there's a ton of Hulk characters in it in Captain America Brave New World.
Well, I can't wait.
It's a lot. It's a lot of Hulk characters.
On my rewatch, when I guess I completely forgot or never even thought to pay attention to what happens to him at the end. I was wondering if they were gonna if they had plans to turn him into what is it, MODOK? Who is that? The giant.
Yep. But then they had a MODOK.
I know, they wasted him.
Yeah, and they made him a huge joke.
Yeah, he's supposed to one of the most formidable enemies. Is it MODOK? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, you're right, MODOK. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the gamma's getting into his brain. His brain started to swell up like a balloon. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's where they were going with this.
Funny enough, the Hulk does fight two villains that have deformities that were impacted by gamma radiation, whereas MODOK became a brain, the leader's brain just increased in size significantly.
Yeah.
But as we talk
you
about
completely
this,
lost me.
I was gonna say, as we talk about this, I can only imagine Pat being like, well, I never read this comic and I don't think I ever will.
I hate this movie. I really do. This is just such garbage. They don't do anything with, and they don't.
The cameos were the best part.
I liked the Lou Ferrigno cameo.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
I did.
That brought a smile to my face.
Yeah. In fact, that might be my favorite part of the movie, which is not a good thing for the movie.
I always enjoy a good Stan Lee cameo in these too.
Yeah, he had a great cameo in this.
Yeah, just a little Brazilian soda.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that was a big market for old people. In the novelization, it's a kid who drinks it.
Yeah, that's
which sort of makes more sense.
Yeah, Marvel doesn't play with that.
Here's something else in the novelization that makes more sense. So in the film, for whatever reason, he wakes Bruce after the fight at the Brazilian bottling plant. He wakes up in Guatemala, which is thousands of miles away, obviously. In the novelization, he's at the border of Brazil and Paraguay, which makes a lot more sense. I don't know why they changed it for the film, but they did.
I think maybe to give you a taste of what the Hulk can really do. I mean,
yes,
the Hulk jump
that's a little closer to the United States, Yeah,
the Hulk's jumping is no joke.
Well, yeah, that's one of his comic powers. That tracks.
Yeah, that's actually that part doesn't bother me as much.
Bothered me. You know how I feel about Paraguay.
Yeah, well, it's because you think Paraguay and Guatemala are the same place.
Yeah, well, according to the MCU, they are. They're just making widely liberal use of the Spanish-speaking countries in these novels.
Speaking of Spanish-speaking, and it's kind of not exactly Spanish-speaking, Portuguese, but I didn't like how well Edward Norton spoke Portuguese. I feel like part of the charm of it would be for a nerdy scientist, he would butcher it a little bit, get it across, but butcher it, not fully integrate within the culture and speak a flawless Portuguese. That also, for some reason, made me believe the character so much less.
I mean, I feel like he was a scientist. He's smart.
Yeah, but that doesn't translate into I feel like learning a language like that is more street smart than book smart. Maybe
fair.
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe.
Did they say how long he was in Brazil for?
They didn't say anything about it. How did he even get to Brazil? Why is he there? How did he contact?
Because it's a weird callback to the first film.
How did he contact Mr. Red?
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, they don't set that up. They don't explain that either. How did he get in touch with Mr. Blue to begin with?
Oh yeah, Mr. Blue. Sorry. Yeah, because he was in a chat room,
Right.
ASLing, and he eventually made a connection. And I happen to be a scientist as well.
I happen to be interested in gamma radiation poisoning.
You wouldn't have any interest in gamma radiation, would you?
Perhaps some giant green monsters?
Send the blood. We need the blood.
Yeah, it's amazing he trusted the guy. Like, I'll just send him a vial of my blood. There's no way that could go wrong.
I mean, he shut down an entire factory because of
Yeah.
dribble of his blood, and he's just like, yeah, all right, this guy seems whatever. I'm sure it'll get there safe.
One of the things I found interesting about watching this back to back with the 2003 film. Now, so I watched this in 4K on Disney Plus, so it was all upscaled. This is a really not good looking film.
It's
not. The visuals are ugly.
This Hulk looked way uglier than Ang Lee's Hulk.
It looked sort of worse.
Yeah,
Definitely
I agree
worse.
with that.
Definitely worse.
I don't get it, because you'd think, okay, it's 5 years later. You would just think by the natural order of things, the CGI would be better, but it didn't. It wasn't any better. When the Hulk's in the cave with Betty and you have the water, there's the colors, the rain, the lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing this in 4K, it was just awful looking.
Agreed.
It's also something to say about it's interesting. It's interesting how they how they ended up with almost like there's no real distinct characteristics of this version of the Hulk that even shows any slight indication it's supposed to kind of look like Edward Norton, which at least with even the sequel films with Mark Ruffalo's Hulk, you can see like, oh yeah, this is like a Hulkified version of Mark Ruffalo. Not so much that it almost feels like parody, but like you can see characteristics. Like there's attention to detail like that. This just kind of felt like generic Hulk.
Yeah.
Pedestrian. That's the word I have in my notes. Everything is pedestrian. The CGI is pedestrian. All of the action sequences are pedestrian. They're not bad by any means, but there's nothing special about them.
No, there's no weight to the fight choreography, if you'd even call it any fight choreography. Stuff just kind of gets flung everywhere. Things get punched through, but it feels no weight to anything.
They exaggerate the inherent issue that I have with the Hulk as a standalone character.
The climax, right? This is supposed to be the part that we're all looking forward to, right? Blonsky transformed into the Abomination. Hulk has to intervene to save Harlem from being destroyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it ends up meaning nothing emotionally, right? Because I think I touched on this earlier. Blonsky never met Banner when he was in his human form. Banner doesn't even know who Blonsky is to begin with. They're total strangers. They have no history with each other, right? Other than they fought each other briefly at the college, but there's just zero stakes. Other than, like Harlem could get destroyed and that would be horrible and you need to save Harlem. But there's no history together. Like, we talked about when Tony Stark fights Obadiah Stane, they have a history together.
Yeah, I think the character of the Hulk, especially in the mindless state that is the Hulk in this film, and Blonsky, the type of person he is that just wants to fight the biggest and baddest, like I think that's where they try to draw that battle to come to that point, because that's the Hulk. He fights whoever's big and bad or bothering him somewhat.
Yeah, which seems like it's just not a compelling reason to bring together these characters to fight. And it to me just seems like they didn't know what they were doing in writing about the Hulk.
Well, he doesn't kill anyone.
Nope, doesn't eat anyone.
Here's the other thing. Why does Betty not want him to kill the Abomination? Like the psychopathic monster who's on a murderous rampage in a highly populated civilian area. Like, is she stupid?
Because Edward Norton would never forgive himself if he did murder, death, kill.
It made no sense to me in the rewatch. She's like, no, don't kill him. Like, why? Why not?
I think I know that guy. He works with my dad.
The most interesting scene in the film for me is either the Lou Ferrigno cameo or when Tony Stark shows up at the end.
That's always the best. I mean, that's the only reason you sat through this film. The only reason we never left.
Which is sad. It's like not even a part of the story. It's just a fun
tacked on. Doesn't fit in. This is a standalone movie. It really is.
Oh, yeah.
Brings us to the next reason why it wasn't better. The problem with the Hulk. We teased this earlier, Anton.
All right.
The Hulk is a difficult character to base a movie around.
It's impossible.
I'm going to read a quote that I read on the last episode, but...
All right.
In an interview he gave about the Avengers, Joss Whedon talked about this exact problem. How the audience wants the complete opposite of what the character wants. Banner doesn't want to be the Hulk, so most of his story is him trying to figure out a way to not be the Hulk, but the audience wants to see the Hulk.
It's fair.
And
That's fair.
I said in the last episode, that's a fair statement. So then I think, like, I still stand by my original statement before. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean there shouldn't be attempts. And it's why I feel like Ang Lee's film, while not a great film, not a good film, I prefer it to this one, not to try to tease out my score a bit too early.
Oof. Oof.
I don't ever want to see another Hulk movie after these 2 attempts.
Yeah, I don't think they're. I mean, who knows? But I can't imagine they would try.
I don't think so either. You have 2 of them, neither of which made money.
They just
It's just
it serves better in his current role.
He does. It's I mentioned this on the last episode. It's the Superman problem, right? You have a superhero that really has no limit in their abilities. The Hulk can't die. How do you keep that interesting over a single movie? I don't know that you can.
This is the
I think Anton, I will concede that anything is possible, but at this point, there's no tension in any of these action sequences.
No, this is the conversation, Pat, I had with you. The problem with this movie and all Hulk movies that are focused solely on the Hulk, it's just how long am I going to sit there and watch these army soldiers shoot bullets at the Hulk, watching them bounce off? How many bullets would it take you to shoot at this big green monster and watch the bullet bounce off before you said, let me stop doing that and probably reassess the situation, not unload the clip because this next bullet's going to get him. I know it. Like, it just makes no sense. That's so dumb.
Yeah, it's what's hard is, I don't disagree in the fact that it's hard to tell a story about the Hulk, but I do think, especially having read comics for a long time, he is such a compelling character. One, the tragic backstory that kind of thrusts Bruce Banner into a really hard situation where he wants to be a good person, but he has his circumstance kind of forces him to not become a superhero, but become a monster. And then evolution over time, how does that monster become a hero? But the other side of it, which no film has gotten right because of the difficulty, is the Hulk is a ticking time bomb, literally. If he becomes the Hulk, people will die.
Right. But they don't want to show
But they
that in the film.
They don't want to show that. And how do you better just communicate, or how do you better convey the utter fear of someone becoming a monster than knowing that if once they turn into the Hulk, many people will die, and those are very high stakes.
Yeah, for sure.
Another reason why I don't think you're going to get another Hulk film anytime soon is I think it sounds like it's very complicated, but Universal still has the rights to at least part of the Hulk in a standalone film. And, of course, obviously Marvel was purchased by Disney after this film came out. My understanding is that if they wanted to, Marvel could claw the rights back from Universal, but it would be expensive. So if you factor in the weak box office performance and Edward Norton being a pain in the ass, they probably just decided it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, they just put She-Hulk in the back burner and said, "We'll take care of it with that."
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone was excited for that.
Ooh, it's as good as I expected it to be.
Yeah, I didn't see it, so
you should. You really should.
I won't. There's
Because
no way.
You could see the Abomination again.
You'd have to pay me. Like I would actually only do it for. I would have to be paid to watch it.
What's up, cousin? I'm a Hulk too. Okay, cool, cousin. That sounds good.
Yeah, and then, okay, the last reason why it wasn't better, right? The release and the competition. There was confusion about this film in the lead up to its release. Was it a sequel? Was it a reboot? Marvel never made this clear, and it definitely did not help things. Now, producer Gail Ann Hurd, she admitted shortly after the release, and she commented on the uncertainty of its relationship with Ang Lee's film. She said, quote, "We couldn't quite figure out how to term this. It's kind of a reboot and it's kind of a sequel," end quote. And then she later referred to it as a requel.
Clever.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's another thing. They started off, he's in Brazil, right? And at the end of the Ang Lee film, he was in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. But then it's not really related to that at all. And as far as Edward Norton was concerned, this film completely ignored Ang Lee's film. Man, Norton must have really pissed them off.
Absolutely.
He has a quote later on. He said, Norton did, quote, "Our healthy process, which is and should be a private matter, was misrepresented publicly as a dispute, seized on by people looking for a good story, and it has been distorted to such a degree that it risks distracting from the film itself, which Marvel, Universal, and I refuse to let happen." It has always been my firm conviction that films should speak for themselves and that knowing too much about how they are made diminishes the magic of watching them, end quote. Well, he didn't want us to know about how this was made because it does not paint him in a positive light.
No, that sounds like he's just trying to get ahead of any bad press.
Yeah, they just did not know what to do with this. The biggest problem with this film for me is that it would work much better as a standalone movie, but it's not. It's technically part of the MCU, but it doesn't fit well into it
at all.
And enough so that they just it went so poorly that even if they did have plans to fit it in better, they just completely just didn't touch it for years until now they're coming back to it with the new Captain America film.
It's baffling because for a while it wasn't even available on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Waste of server space.
If you had to sum it up, you could say this, right? It was originally written as a pseudo sequel to a film that nobody liked to begin with, but they could never fully commit to actually making it a true sequel, and then they decided to repurpose the script and turn it into a pseudo reboot by replacing the entire cast, but they never fully committed to that either. And then they took that and then they tried to shove it into the MCU, which was brand new at the time. It ends up working as nothing, right? It doesn't work as a sequel, it doesn't work as a reboot, and it doesn't work as part of the MCU.
It does not.
I feel like they just had to take another shot at it because they must have, to a degree, known how important the Hulk is to the overall MCU. So, with the failure that was the first film, I feel like someone had to say, like, let's give it one more shot, get him in a better light so we could start to introduce him and people aren't like, oh, this guy. And they just couldn't do it.
I mentioned how this was tacked on earlier, that the Tony Stark cameo, it really was tacked on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stark meeting Ross at the bar, it's not even featured in the novelization. It was clearly a last-minute addition. And even then, now I'm saying this with the benefit of hindsight, and they couldn't have known this at the time because it wasn't fully fleshed out yet. But even then, what Stark tells Ross doesn't make sense. He tells him we're putting a team together, right? He's like implying the Avengers Initiative. But we know Stark was not part of putting that together, right? It would have been Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. So Stark telling Ross this, it doesn't even fit in with the rest of what the MCU would become.
0 cents.
Yep.
But it was cool to see Tony Stark again.
It was.
They just wanted to give away to show that there's a connection.
It really is a standalone movie they tried to shove into the MCU at the last minute.
Yeah.
Very clear that was it was not a well-baked film. Or it was not a fully baked film. I'll tell you that.
Also, at the time of release, it had some pretty serious box office competition, right? So we mentioned how Iron Man was released a month before this. It was still in theaters when this film came out. Iron Man would end up grossing $585 million. This did not even make half of that. But it was also competing with the following films: Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the Sex and the City movie, and the first Kung Fu Panda. The Happening was released the same weekend, which sucks, but it sort of made some money. And then you had Get Smart and Wall-E came out shortly after. And then The Dark Knight followed a couple weeks after this. So it's really no wonder this film got outshone.
Man, I really liked Wall-E.
Great movie. What about The Happening? You a big fan of that one?
No.
Oh, that was really, M. Night Shyamalan was just on a roll of just
The Happening.
bombs.
More like what is happening?
Bombs.
My God, if there's a director, not a fan.
Look, I've mentioned this before to you, Ryan. There's a person who will remain nameless who keeps trying to get me to reinvest in watching Shyamalan's movies. We
Which
both
ones?
know him.
Do it.
Which
And
one?
it's like there is no possibility of me ever watching anything he did again.
What's
I
the
mean-
redemption film like that you're being pointed towards? I'd have to know.
This person told me like The Visit and some of his newer stuff, like that one on the beach where everybody gets old.
It's Pete.
After The Last Airbender, there's no way.
He did
That was
Signs,
the
right?
final nail in the coffin for me.
He was Signs, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I loved. Even though
Yeah, I like Signs.
you take the actual premise out of it and it's a great movie, but then when you actually stop and you start thinking, you're like, hey, these aliens just came to take over a planet that's made large majority of water, but that's what kills them. It's not well
Right.
thought out, What kind of his
No,
films
but
just
I
always
agree
do
with
that.
you. That had really good thrills in it, really
Yeah.
good scares, and a really great performance from Mel Gibson.
Yes.
Where it all started to go wrong for Shyamalan was The Village.
Oh my God.
Tried to
That movie
follow.
was so for me, that movie was great until it wasn't.
Is that one of the most dramatic second
Letdowns?
half flips ever?
Yes.
The
Oh my
first half is great.
yes. It was a phenomenal movie, and then all of a sudden, you leave and you go, "That was awful," because of what they did.
Yeah, he
Well, we're gonna
easily
cover that this fall for Halloween. Are you interested?
No.
You sure?
Yeah,
Sounds
no.
like you have
You don't want to
strong
return to
feelings.
the village?
No, I will never watch that film again. Ever. Ever. Once you know what happened, it's not one of those things like, it's been a couple of years. Let me rewatch. I know exactly what's going to happen. And for that reason, I will never watch it again.
What if I volunteered you for it?
I will have a prior commitment. I will
I don't know
gladly
what that commitment is, but I will
watching the
have it.
Hulk, watching every Hulk.
You'd rather watch the
You'd rather
Hulk
watch the
again
Hulk?
than the Village?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No way. The Ang Lee one?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you'd give that an F?
That is so beyond an F for me. Because it's not like
This
it's
is
just
disappointing.
it's not like it's just a bad film. You took a good film and you ruined it.
I know what you mean. The potential.
Yeah, it was all there.
Really begs the question, why wasn't it better? Oh, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
The ending.
Well,
That's the
the
shortest
reason.
episode.
That's the exact reason I dislike the Ang Lee Hulk more than the film we're talking about on this episode, because the potential of Ang Lee making that film promised so much, and it was so bad.
You didn't like the dogs?
I didn't. No, I was explaining this on the recording, and I'll tell you now, Ryan, just because you won't hear that episode for a while. I did not realize that the film starts off with the 1960s flashback, and it was about midway through that flashback, which is acted like a soap opera. It's so bad. I paused the film and like checked the stream just to make sure I was watching the right movie. I was like, is this the right? Like, what is this? I almost texted Anton at one point, we can't cover this film. I can't watch anymore. Like,
Oh my god. I get it.
That's how I felt about this film, The Incredible Hulk.
so let's wrap it up then, right? We talked about the problem with Edward Norton. We talked about this film not being memorable. We talked about the problem with the Hulk and adapting him for the big screen. And then we talked about just the confusion around the release and the competition. It's time to give our opinions about whether or not we liked it. Ryan, as you are the guest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. Overall, as we've all pointed out, there's just so many flaws. The characters completely unbelievable, poorly cast. The movie, the plot, the actual storyline was just bland. It made no interest peaking for me. It was also confusing because again, he just kind of starts in Brazil and trying to figure out how to get this out of his body, but there's no backstory that you could really go back to because they wanted to separate from the original film. So there was a lot wrong with it. The villain was terrible. I don't know. The action wasn't even good, and there was plenty of it. So that being said, though, I will say I didn't fall asleep during it when I rewatched it. I watched it all the way through in one go. It was short enough that I could knock it out in one shot, and there's something to be said for that. I don't think it was horrible. It was just like very bland, boring, and kind of insignificant. So for that reason, I'm gonna give it a D minus.
Wow, better than I expected.
Yeah. I figured it'd be a little bit of a surprise there.
Huh? Yeah. Wow. I'm glad. Anton, I can go first if you
Sure.
want.
Sure.
Okay. So I gave Ang Lee's film an F, and it's like it really should be an F minus. I just can't even articulate how much I hated that movie. I said that he should have one of his Oscars taken away for it. Like, well, you made that one. Like, we're gonna take one back, buddy. Never make a superhero movie again. This one, the Marvel movie that Marvel wants to forget. I saw a joke on Twitter that this should be called the Insignificant Hulk instead. That is a more appropriate title.
Mhm.
There is nothing about this film that is incredible. As a pure superhero film, this offers very little. Despite his brilliance as an actor, and I really do like Edward Norton, he is miscast. The villain is about as bad as it gets. The action sequences are pedestrian. Nothing about this film is memorable. They couldn't even agree on how to market it. You had all the negative press about Norton in the studio. It just got lost in the summer blockbuster shuffle. I haven't seen all the MCU films, but This is probably the worst one that I can think of. It's certainly the least important. It doesn't really add anything to the bigger story. It's really no wonder that people skip it. It's a complete dead end storytelling wise. There was really nothing about this film that I enjoyed. I couldn't remember anything about the score. The CGI was like weirdly somehow on the same level as the 2003 film. I did enjoy it more than the 2003 film, but only slightly, and that's not saying much. That was bad and boring. This is just bad. I will never rewatch this. And if you're trying to get into the MCU, you can feel free to skip this lemon. This is an F.
Very
Fair.
nice, Pat. Very nice. Just to put it simply, this film is an F. Um, where do we start? I'm not convinced that the studios tried to expose the film reel to gamma radiation to kind of make this film bigger than it was, and then what they ended up with, they had to cut up and put up this bastardized version of a film. It upsets me to see a property that has so much more creativity, promise, comes from the house of mystery, which is Marvel, and instead they come up with just the most one-dimensional piece of crap that really I hate to have to waste my time watching. I really will stand by this. Ang Lee's film was bad, but to me that potential was so much more than whatever Marvel put out with 2008's Incredible Hulk. At least there was an attempt. At least there was a clear vision on what kind of story was being told. I feel like the story here was just so bland. I feel like Edward Norton was not even a saving grace for the film, and despite his body of work and his strength as an actor, I just think that it was such a poor performance, and then that was kind of across the board. So to me, this is the worst MCU film. It's really funny. I shared with Pat over the weekend. I saw a list. I saw it on Reddit where it was the A through F or A through F scale of different films in the MC or comic book movies. And there's a lot of films from the Sony Marvel universe that are in the F scale.
Mm-hmm.
And for almost the exact same reasons. I feel like there was writing that had the films with poor acting, poor understanding of the source material, and just no courage in trying to tell a story with meaning. This film is an F, and I will never watch it again.
Ryan, do you want to lower your score? I feel like
No, I'm sticking to it. Listen, it's bad, but it wasn't. There's so many worse films out there, and
there's definitely worse.
Even if you narrow it down to the superhero category, there's plenty of worse films. I just think it was boring, but like it was also like it wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen.
Well, hold on. Let me float this to you. We should give you some opportunity here.
Mm-hmm.
There are levels to F.
Exactly.
Think of it like a test grade, right? If you get a 59, it's an F. If you get a 1, it's an F, right? Or an F minus, whatever. But just, food for thought.
I understand. Here's the way that I'm seeing it. This is my lens here. When I finished the film again, I wasn't mad that I watched it. I kind of chuckled. I was like, that's so bad. When certain of these other films that we've spoken about, like The Village, I would be pissed if I sat and watched it. I guess that's the emotional connection to my grading, is that I was very vanilla on whatever. That movie was terrible and it's kind of funny. Good thing we saw Lou Ferrigno, and man, Tony Stark at the end got me excited when I first saw it. It was meh. It was D-. It was terrible, but it didn't piss me off that I watched it.
Well, it pissed me off.
Well, you should try some breathing exercises that I learned.
That might be the dumbest thing in the film.
He literally was regaining stamina like a video game.
You know what I also noticed too? He's doing, I don't know why I mentioned this earlier. He's doing martial arts. How would his heart rate not be elevated at any point? Like, how did he exercise?
Vigorous training, and he would just stop. You can control. I mean, that is real, right? There is training to control your heart rate.
Your heart rate.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about this movie
but
anymore.
It's like, out of everything they could have written about, they thought that was going to be interesting to put in a movie.
just slap me again.
Just man.
It's better. Okay, slap me.
Well, gentlemen, that is it for the Incredible Hulk. Ryan, it's been a pleasure.
An honor and a privilege, as always.
Yes, we'll have to bring you back. This is appearance number 3. How about 3 more? How does that sound, Ryan?
You know what? I'll give you a soft commitment to 3 more.
Well, you're already committed to at least one because you're going to be back this season.
That's true, but maybe I will, maybe I won't.
Well, you already committed to it, so you're locked in.
The mystery.
Yeah. Well, we can tell the listeners what you'll be back for if you want.
Yeah, unless I jump to Guatemala and never hear from me again.
You will be back for the second animated film that we talk about this season, Ants.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. I have feelings about that movie.
I do too.
Good or bad, I won't say.
Neither will I. Well, that is it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? You will be hearing a bonus episode later this week that is Easter themed. And the episode that you will be hearing next week is, Anton, do you know it offhand? Because I do not.
Yes, it is the next episode. We are going to be soaring into the skies of the fantastical world of swords and martial arts.
Oh, that's right.
Crouching?
That's right. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny.
Oh, love it.
The sequel that no one knows exists.
Depends.
Have you seen it, Ryan?
Nope.
Did you know it was a thing until I told you about it?
I'm going to go watch it.
Yep, it's on Netflix.
Yeah, it's on. It is a Netflix film.
A little concerning that it's going to be a topic of discussion.
It ain't great. I'll tell you that. It's better than these two Hulk films.
Okay, there you go. So I won't be mad when I finish watching it.
Who knows?
Look, I won't hype it up for you. It ain't great.
Okay.
But I do not think it's as horrible as its reputation is.
Okay, fair.
That's all I'll say. So we will see you next time on Why Wasn't It Better?